Yeah, hi. My name is Marvin Hornstein, and I was born in September 1929 here in Omaha, Nebraska. And my parents, my father was Sam Hornstein, and my mother was Bessie Hornstein, or Bess. And some of my earliest recollections here in Omaha, well, the big thing when I was about 4.5 years old, my parents took me to Russia for a trip to visit my father's parents. He was born in a little bitty town, Little Orly in Russia. It always reminded me of the movie of Fiddler on the Roof, where it was a little village, and I think he said some of the people had dirt floors. I know when I come into my house now and I traipse in a little bit of dirt, and my wife Bobby will say something about, oh, you tracked in. I keep bringing up, well, gee, my father had dirt floors. We didn't have this problem then. But anyway, I remember when I was very small. I don't remember anything before that, but I do remember a few things from a trip to Russia. My mother, Bess, was from the Harris family. Her maiden name was Bess Harris, and she was actually born in London, England. And we also at the same time visited London. And I remember going out into this little village where it was so primitive that some of the funny memories would just sort of surprise me even to this day, even though it was so long ago. When I saw a cake at the house of one of my father's relatives, and I thought it was a chocolate cake. And I got up closer, and suddenly it became a white cake, because what made it look dark, it was covered with flies. And all the flies flew away, and I see it was a white frosted cake, because nobody had screens on their windows. They wouldn't know what a screen looked like. And I remember getting extremely sick. They thought they were going to lose me out in the fields. I was eating cucumbers raw right from the vines, and I got so sick. I didn't think I was going to make it back to the United States. But these were some of the memories from back then. And then I was actually, as I say, born in Omaha, and my father came over in the early 1900s. I don't know the date. I think he was maybe 19 years old or something in that range. And he worked at whatever job he could get. He came in to what they used to call the second Ellis Island, which was Galveston, Texas. In fact, a few years ago, Bobby, my wife, and I happened to be down in Houston, and we drove down to Galveston, and they had a model set up of the whole area there. But that's where a lot of my family came in, and during that period, and they went right to Omaha. And anyway, my first year of life, year or two, I lived in the back of a store on 28th and Vinnie Street. It was a Hornstein grocery, naturally. And a little later, we bought a house up the street on 2003 Vinnie Street, about 8 blocks away. And that's where I grew up until I was probably one or so, until I was, about 13, 14 years old when we moved out west to Pierce Street, which now isn't considered so far west. It was 60th and Pierce. And it amazes me how far Omaha goes out today, but you all know that. But anyway, where was I? Talking about the store, and I remember as a little kid I would be able to sell candy to some of the customers that would come in, and it was fun. It was during the Depression time, and even though a lot of people were having problems in the Depression, having a grocery store, we always had plenty of food on the table. And that's the wonderful thing about your father having a grocery store. And I remember also that we usually got the tomatoes that were a little maybe damaged, or the apples that maybe had a worm in it. It was the type of things that maybe didn't sell so easily. That's what we would have to eat, because we certainly didn't want to waste any food. You know, we grew up during the time when we had to finish everything on our plate, because all the 4 little kids in Europe were starving, and I'll never figure out how they were going to get the food that I didn't finish on my plate, but we always wondered about that. But we didn't ask any questions. At that time, things were strict. We did as we were told, and it was fun growing up in Omaha, and I didn't know any other place. In fact, I really didn't go anywhere until out of Omaha that I remember, except we would drive out to Lake Okoboji for summer vacations, and that was fun times, and we were always very frugal. I remember with the the highways going up and down, every time we got to the top of a hill, my father would turn the motor off so we would coast down the hill and save all that gas. And at the bottom of the hill, he'd turn the key on and we'd start the motor and we'd drive up the hill. When we got to the top of the hill, he'd turn the key off and we would coast down the hill, and I figured, well, that's the way you drive. I just figured I learned from my parents. And we don't do that today, of course. But it was fun. And later on, after we sold the store and moved out to Vincent area, and my father bought another store on Military, and eventually with my older brother, went into business at the Flomar Hotel downtown downtown Omaha. I'm from Los Angeles, as you could tell. And we moved out there, about 50 years ago, 54 years, 53 years to be exact. But anyway, and then got the Windsor Hotel and Bar, which is down on 10th and Jackson, which we really enjoy visiting now because the old marketplace is really a great tourist attraction. Anyway, to back up a little bit, I'm going a little bit too fast. I don't have any full brothers and sisters, but I have two sisters, Dorothy and Helen, and Dorothy was from with the same mother as I have, and Helen was from the same father. And then I had three brothers, Fred and Joe and Julius. And unfortunately, the only one that's left now is Joe, living down in Atlanta, Georgia. We all sort of scattered. During the war, my sister Helen took a job with the OSS in Washington, and she, to me, was like a hero working with all these secret things in Washington, D.C. During the war, while my brother Fred was in the Navy, and he was all over the world. My brother Joe was up in Alaska in the Army. My brother Julius was over in Europe during World War II, and my sister in Washington, and of course I was too young. I was the youngest one in the family. I was the baby. All my brothers and sisters were at least 8, 10 years or more older than I am. But it was fun. I remember when I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, I was the only one left at home, and I would write type up a little monthly newsletter on a typewriter, an old manual typewriter with carbon paper, and I called it the Omaha News, and I would draw a little cartoon, and I would make copies explaining how everyone was doing. We'd mail it out to the family, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it. And well, I don't know what else could I say. I don't know that much about I never really met or knew my grandparents, because they were either gone before I came along or died shortly thereafter. I was named after my mother's mother, my grandmother on my mother's side, and I never really met. I met a lot of my father's brothers and all, such as my Uncle Kiwi, who of course was here. Everyone knew him, Kiwi Hornstein at the Jewish home here. He was very well known, and he was quite a person. And I had other relatives who all came, I believe, to this country after my father did. I think my father was one of the oldest, or the oldest one. And I remember when he was even up in his 80s or late 80s, and he would be shoveling snow here in Omaha, and finally he was having a hard time due to his age, and he would say, well, Kiwi my younger brother, he's only maybe 82 or 83. He could still do this, even though he can't. But they always were very close. They both had grocery stores, and I remember growing up, we would go visit my Uncle Kiwi at his grocery store, and it was a fun time. I always enjoyed Omaha. And I don't know, do you have any questions?
Marvin, tell me a little bit about your early school education.
Went to Lothrop School out in North Omaha, which was just a few blocks, And I tell my kids, as they all did, how we used to trudge through the snow for 2 miles. It wasn't quite 2 miles, but we did trudge through the maybe a foot or two of snow in the wintertime. Never heard of such things as carfuls back in those days. And very much enjoyed looking at it when we came back for visits. Later went to Central High School. I was very active in music. I was played trumpet and violin, and used to be in the Jewish Community Center Symphony Orchestra that they used to have there, along with my sister Helen. She also played violin. And I remember when I was 11 years old, I gave a recital as part of our our yearly concerts. I remember looking back now, I had my picture in the Omaha Jewish Press, and I was so excited at the time after the concert. I still play the same 2 tunes that I played back then. That's my favorite 2 tunes today. And I was so excited. I remember I had lost my voice after the concert, and I was unable to talk for maybe an hour or two, because to me that was one of the most exciting times of my life. By the time I was 14, I was quite a good trumpet player. In fact, I joined the Musicians Union here in Omaha when I was 14. Played all through high school professionally with Eddie Haddad's band, which was very popular. Played for all the school dances that Central High gave. And we used to travel. We would go, even though I was maybe 15 and 16 years old, we'd travel to Kansas City and Minneapolis and a lot of small towns around. And it was a very exciting time of my life. But as I say, I was active in Central High, and I was playing like first trumpet in the marching band, and first violin in the Omaha Central High School orchestra. And by the time I was a senior, I was a captain of the band, and I would lead the band across the football field during halftime at the football games on Friday nights. But it was a fun time of my life, that's for darn sure. And then went to University of Omaha for a year, which is now UNO, and then the last 3 years of college I went to University of Nebraska down in Lincoln. I met my wife Bobby in high school, and we went to the military ball when I was a senior. And when I graduated, Bobby also went to University of Nebraska in Lincoln for a short while, and I remember graduating from the university on June 4th, and we were married June 6th. 1951, and I always told her that I'd be able to just give her one gift, for her happy birthday and happy anniversary. And she would never accept that. She says, no, she says, remember, they're a year apart, from June 4th to June 6th, it's a year apart. I want 2 gifts, so I always remember to do that. But we stayed in Omaha for a year. I took a job with the U.S. Corps of Engineers as a structural engineer, and we moved out to California a year later. And we've been there ever since. We've been in our same house now in Tarzana, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. We've been in our same house now for 44 years, which pretty stable, since none of our neighbors, they've all come and gone, and we still seem to be there. But we sort of hold on to the old things. We're just small town folks, I guess.
Marvin, tell me a little bit about your children.
We have 2 boys, which we're very proud of. Our first son came along. He's 46 now, and his name is Bruce. And he's an optometrist, and he has his own office in Glendale, California, which is just right next to Los Angeles, maybe a half-hour drive. And he married Rona, and he has one child, a 16-year-old. He's 6 foot tall. He's the tallest one in our family, and we've enjoyed him. And we see him quite often. I'm glad we all live in the same town. And my younger son, Steve, who is, he's 37 now, and he's everything. In fact, he's passed the bar as an attorney. He's a CPA. He's a certified financial planner. He's a musician. He plays piano. He writes music. He sings, and he's a good cook. He has people over, and I don't know, he amazes me, but that's just the way he is. So we enjoy, and he lives very close to us, maybe about 2 or 3 minute car ride away, about a mile away. And my office in Tarzana, we're all in Tarzana, is maybe a block or two from Steve's house. So I go by his house practically every day that I go to work. My son, my older son Bruce, lives in Westwood, California, not too far from UCLA. So it's a little bit further in town, but we get together, quite often, and of course all the holidays. And we had a big Seder, as we do every year, over at Steve's house, because he bought a new house about 3 years ago. And a very exciting time. We just came to Omaha for bat mitzvah of my niece and nephew's daughter. That's Martha and Seth Frischman, and their daughter just had a bat mitzvah of Becky, and we were just here a year and a half ago for their son Isaac's bar mitzvah. And just as we got here Friday night, 2-3 days ago, my son Steve brought his, at that time, girlfriend, Bryna, and he asked her and proposed to her and gave her the ring just 2 nights ago. So it was all announced in Omaha to her surprise, and it was a wonderful occasion. And it's only been like 3 days now, and they just left to go back to Los Angeles. But it was a lot of excitement,
Marvin, let's go back a little bit and talk about some of the holidays on 20th and Binney.
Oh, well, it was an old house. Unfortunately, last time we came to Omaha, we drove by and the house had been taken down and it's just an empty lot. Same with the store on 28th and Binney. It's empty. They tore it down to put the highway through, and the first apartment we lived at on 29th near Leavenworth is torn down for the interstate, and it seems like every place I lived is no longer there. But on 20th and Binney, it was a big old 2-story house, and not too, maybe about a mile or less from my grade school, Lothrop School. And we used to have the family seders there. I remember I would always take pictures. I was sort of the family photographer. I had a enlarger and darkroom. In fact, I have the same enlarger today, all these years later, as my folks bought me when I was 14 years old. And I remember we still look back at some of the pictures of our whole entire family when we would have the seders there every year. And we would also walk to the old Rosh Hashanah Shul, which is now the Beth Israel, which I understand they just built a new one now out in the west side of Omaha. And we would walk to the services, and of course that was on 18th and Chicago Street, where all the women had to sit upstairs and the men were downstairs. And I remember the holidays were always a very happy time, very enjoyable, and used to spend most of our time, as I think most people do, in the big kitchen with the big round table, and it was a fun time.
How about your bar mitzvah? Do you remember it very well?
Yeah, the bar mitzvahs back then, of course, weren't like the bar mitzvahs today. Today they're like weddings, but I remember my bar mitzvah, and the thing I remember most, it was basically a bar mitzvah at 18th in Chicago, the shul there, and coming back to the house, and we had everything just in the house. And I remember, mainly I remember loving the pickled herring. That's the thing that's outstanding, because we didn't have big things. We had food, and a lot of food, and appetizers and things, but none of the big sit-down dinners and things that they have today with the orchestras and the bands and the dancing and all. But it was still very enjoyable, and it was great.
You mentioned earlier about going back to Russia with your family.
Yes.
What are your recollection of family members that were still in Russia at that time?
It's funny, but only being like 4.5 years old, I remember the family members, the men with the big hats, black hats, and most of them had beards and mustaches. But it was hazy to me of who was my father's brother or cousin or family. I never did know to this day who was who. I just knew they were all part of his family in this little village. And unfortunately, we didn't have the video cameras and tape recorders and all the records. I wish we would have done what you're doing here today. I would have liked to interview my father in detail and find out who was who. And since I was the last child to come along with my parents, because I was the baby of the family, much later than the rest of my brothers and sisters, they didn't seem to talk that much about, their earliest days. So I didn't really have all the details that probably my older brothers and sisters do or did.
Did your father have any other siblings other than Uncle Kiva?
No, we only knew of cousins, and I don't think so. That if they were, they weren't here. They weren't in this country, unless I completely have a lapse of memory. But I remember we were always very close to Uncle Kiva, because we would just see them all the time. We'd go over there, they would come over our house, and they're the main ones. The rest of the family were, as I say, cousins, and right now I have a hard time really remembering the name. But we had, my mother had several sisters here. There was Lil, who was later married to Jake Brookstein, Lil, and then a sister, Minnie, or Mildred, but we always called her Aunt Minnie, who also later moved to California. And then a sister, Ray, who was married to Moishe Kupferman. And she had, several sisters that we used to see quite often. But my father, I only remember Uncle Kivi. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about being active in ROTC at Central High School. Were you active in any other groups at Central?
Well, mostly my whole career at, educational career, so to speak, at Central High was mostly music. In fact, when I graduated, I was voted in the senior popularity contest as best musician, and everybody would write in my yearbook, "Good luck in your future musical career." Everybody thought I was going to make a career of music. But music being what it is, it's such a tiny percentage of musicians really make it. Most of them are unemployed. I figure I better not count on that for my career, so I decided to go into engineering, which I've always loved. Ever since my parents took me to, when we went to Russia, we were in New York for a few days, and I'll never forget looking up at the Empire State Building, which at that time was probably only about 4 or 5 years old, and that impressed me so much. And I remember getting home and later on having been given an erector set where we would make little models, and I think I always wanted to be an engineer of some sort. And I didn't have to make much of a decision when I got to college age, and they asked me what did I want to do. I said I want to go into architecture and engineering, and that's what I did, and that's what I've been at ever since.
You mentioned earlier that you were the family photographer. What other works did you do in photography?
Well, I had a darkroom, as I say, from the time I was like 13, 14 years old, and I would take pictures. I was the staff photographer on the Central High Register, which is the Central High school paper, and I would take pictures of all the school plays and the school opera and everything that came along. And I remember making 8x10s of all of the scenes, and the teacher would hang them up in their room, and I would make copies and sell them for a nominal fee. And I had a little business going on the side where I would develop people's rolls of film and make copies of their little snapshots for maybe 2 cents or 3 cents each. Things were cheap back then. In fact, I'll never forget when I was recently going through some old papers, and when I was a small child, I had some kind of an ear infection, and I had to have some surgery at one of the hospitals here, and I just came across the bill from the hospital bill, which is sort of unbelievable, because I think the operating room cost, I think, was $6 or $7 for the operating room. The hospital room, I think, was $2 or $3 a day, and there was a miscellaneous. The entire bill, I think, came to $13. which today wouldn't cover an aspirin. But it's interesting to look back on how things were back then. Things have really changed. In fact, when we got married in 1951, the first medical insurance that Bobby and I took out paid $7 a day toward the hospital room. And today, as I say, that wouldn't cover anything with the costs. But it's unbelievable how things were back in those days.
Tell me a little bit about your wife Bobby's family.
Yeah, she lived on 47th Street. She went to Dundee School out around, I forgot what street it was, and she lived around 47th Street. And I first met her when I was a senior in high school at Central High, and she was a junior. Although today she makes me tell people she was 12 years younger than me, but she'll never admit to being over 39, but that's okay. Jack Benny made a whole career of that. But she was very active in singing. She has a wonderful singing voice. She was in the school choir. She sang at Bethel in the choir every Friday night. In fact, I used to pick her up after that when we would first start dating, and she. When we both went to school at the University of Nebraska, and then she came back and she worked as a copywriter for Brandeis department store down on 16th and Douglas. And of course that whole area has changed so much now. But she enjoyed writing copy that would be in the newspaper ads and the World Herald. And my first job being with the Corps of Engineers was like a half a block away across the street, right on 16th Street. So we would be able to have lunch together every day. But I told her she could have been a famous singer if the right opportunity came along. She would always sing like remind me of Doris Day, the way her voice was. And she still sings today, really, of course, mostly in the shower, but I still enjoy hearing her.
I'd like to hear a little bit about your wedding.
Oh, our wedding. Since Bobby and her family were members of Bethel, and my family were members of Beth Israel, when we got married, we had both rabbis, Rabbi Krifke from Bethel, and Rabbi, and a memory loss, from Beth Israel. And we had both rabbis there, and the wedding itself was, of course, at Bethel, and it was in the middle of the week. I remember it was raining, and it was during that time where there was sort of a certain area where you couldn't get married during that period, and we tried to fit it into the schedule. But it was a nice wedding. We had the whole thing right there at the Bethel, and I remember staying that night afterwards. We stayed one night at the Blackstone Hotel, which I understand is no longer the Blackstone Hotel. And we went on our honeymoon to Colorado Springs in Denver, which is the first time I ever saw a mountain other than the hill in Omaha. But it was very nice.
Who was your best man?
My brother Julie was my best man, and then I had several fraternity brothers, and same with Bobby. I was a Sammy, a Sigma Alpha Mu, at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and I stayed there for the 3 years that I was there at the Sammy House, which also is no longer there. And Bobby was a member of Sigma Delta Tau, SDT, the Jewish sorority down at Lincoln, and she just a few blocks away, and we were both down there together, which was a fun time. And it was great. And then later, as I say, she left school to work to save up some money at Brandeis as a copywriter, and until the time we got married.
You mentioned that you're an engineer. I'd like to hear something about your engineering career.
Yeah, my degree was a graduate a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Engineering, which was the best course for what I'm doing today, because I'm actually a licensed, registered structural engineer in California. And of course, structural engineering is very important in California because of the earthquake problems. And I've had my own office as a consulting structural engineer Oh, I remember opening up on a unique day, April Fool's Day, 1964. That's when I first opened my office. And after having worked for the Corps of Engineers and a couple of other firms in the meantime. But everything, you can't build a doghouse in California without a structural engineer, because everything is engineered from the smallest house to the largest high-rise buildings. And I have a small firm, and most of my work consists of homes, new homes, apartments. I'm doing a school for Los Angeles Unified School District right now. And I've done all kinds of things. I've done a building, Jerry Lewis Neuromuscular Research Building out at UCLA in Los Angeles. I've done a City Hall building out in Ontario, California, which was not too far from Los Angeles. I've done a lot of shopping centers, supermarkets, drugstores, you name it. Over a period of all these many years, I've done just about everything. But they're very strict, and as I say, there's always a shortage of good structural engineers out there, because right now construction is booming, and it's a very busy time. I've never been busier in my life. I don't feel at this time of my life that if my health keeps up, I don't think I would ever completely retire, because I like the work and it keeps me active. I might like to cut down a little bit on my work, but it's very hard to do. But I can't imagine completely retiring the way I feel now, unless, as I say, if my health required it, of course I would. But I think I'm going to work there until I just collapse at my desk one day, and you're going to find me there sprawled over that desk.
Let's talk a little bit about some of your accomplishments in your field.
Well, in my field, back in 1973, I was elected president of the Los Angeles Consulting Structural Engineers Society, which is made up of members that have their own structural engineering offices, such as mine, not employees or people that work for the government, but they're all people in Los Angeles area that have their offices like mine. And I've been very active with the group all these years, and last year I call myself the recycled president because I was elected president for the second time 30 years later, also as president, and I just completed the term, so I'm in the same boat as Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton and all that group as an ex-president. But it was fun being president. I could write a newsletter, and I felt I could say whatever I liked. Every month I would write a big newsletter that went out to all our members, and I would always be complaining about the problems with the building departments, and they all know me down at the building department, and I always jokingly ask them if they still have a dartboard up with my picture, because I'm always causing them trouble, because some of their rules and regulations just seem to be, I hate to say it, but sort of foolish. But you know, it's hard to fight City Hall. But I've been around for so long, when they see my structural license number, structural engineer number 875, they say, gee, is that guy still living? You know, because I was very young when I was licensed. I was one of the youngest that got licensed as structural engineer in California, and it's been a big part of my life. I really enjoy it. I enjoy working on plans. We work with architects and contractors, and we do the basic skeleton, foundations, and everything that holds a building together, and then make sure that it can stand through an earthquake, as well as the normal uses of people walking on it, roofs, and whatever you have to do to make sure it's strong. And it's nice to be able to do the drawings and the engineering and the calculations and watch the building go up and be able to drive by the buildings and say, gee, I did that back when. And now since the earthquake, we're required to go out there during construction and check to make sure that they're following the plans, because during the Northwoods earthquake of 10 years ago, they found that many buildings collapsed or had many failures, because even though the drawings and the plans were correct, the contractors would leave out important parts, and it wouldn't be built following the plan. So now the engineer, as myself, is required to go out during construction at certain intervals and just to make sure that in general that they're following the intent of the plans. And it's a much safer condition, and that type of thing I agree with. So the new buildings that are put up today in California are many times stronger than they were even 10 years ago. It's quite a science. I would say that Los Angeles is the best construction and building departments of any place in the world. There's nothing like it. I've been licensed in 10 other states throughout the country, and I've done work, back in New Jersey and Florida and Kansas and even Omaha. I did one project, and nobody requires as much as well thought out plans as California. There's no question about it. They're the tops in the world. But even though I complain that sometimes they go overboard, in general, it's been very good. Yeah, and one more thing. About 20 years ago, my sister Helen, who was living in New York, sent me an article that was written. I believe somebody wrote a letter to the New York Times to the extent that buildings weren't being built safe enough, and it's beyond the capability of engineers and architects to design safe buildings. Because as many of us remember, 20-some years ago, there were some significant building failures in the United States, such as in Kansas City. There was a Hyatt Hotel bridges that collapsed during a tea dance in the lobby, and 110 people were killed. There was a building in Hartford, Connecticut, the Coliseum, or a main auditorium building that collapsed shortly after an architects convention had just left the room, and the entire roof fell in. And there's been many failures through the years, and I sort of took, I decided that I would write an article in answer to this, saying that it wasn't necessarily the engineer's fault. And as I was writing the article to send back to my sister and to write to the newspaper, it got longer and longer, and I decided to make a book out of it. So about 20 years ago, I did write and have published a book entitled The Sky is Falling, Why Buildings Fail. And in it, it's a paperback book. I have pictures and articles about some of the failures that I just talked about, like the Hyatt Hotel collapse, Hartford, Connecticut, and many other failures throughout the years. And in preparing the book, I wrote to some of the newspapers, and where I purchased photos of some of these collapses, and I have some of the photos in the book. And then came the time to try to get it published, and I wrote a little synopsis of the book and mailed it out to about 60 publishers that I thought would have an interest in this kind of a publication. And I got back 59 rejection slips, and one very excited publisher called me from South Bend, Indiana. And Books is the name of it. It's a small publisher, and they were very excited. They said they were willing to publish it. They thought it was a great idea, and they would pay for, doing the artwork on the cover, and they would get me a royalty. I received this call. It was late at night from this very excited publisher, and they said they would like to publish the book and give me a royalty. So they went ahead and did it, and. It's funny, one of the things in the book talk about the fact that there's never enough time allotted to do a proper job. Everybody is in such a rush, and the fees that they want to pay the engineers and architects are never enough to cover all the required time that would go into doing a really good job. The pressure is just too much. And here the book was published, and I told them that I would like to look it over, to check it over before it went to final print. And they said, well, they don't have time for that because they have to get it ready for a book show. So here they sent out the book, a couple of thousand copies all over the country. It's not that big of a thing. And to get in the book show, and when I got the copy, I made a list of all the little spelling errors. Back at that time, they didn't have all this spell check and all of this on the computers, but I was sort of upset. But the book still turned out to be pretty good, and it was a fun thing to do. Not that I made much money from it, but It was, I got a call from the local TV station, Channel 9 in Los Angeles, from Meredith McCrae, who had she hosted a morning TV show, and they called me to come down there for a live interview where she would interview maybe 4 or 5 different people in different types of businesses. And I remember going down there without ever meeting or talking to anybody, and I'm sitting in the waiting room, and they said when they have a commercial, they'll call me to go in, and I'm supposed to sit in front of the camera, and there it is, a live show. And I remember they put me into a little side room, and they put a little powder on my face for the makeup, and I'm sitting next to a person who was going to be interviewed just before me, and he did the voice for the cartoon character, the Smurfs. If you remember the Smurfs, these blue characters on TV, it was sort of funny. And then the next thing I know, they call me into the room, and there I am doing a live interview of questions and answers on how safe are buildings in Los Angeles and all this sort of thing. It was exciting, and I also got a call from a seminar that was going on in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where they bought 500 copies of my book to give out to the members that were coming to the seminar, talking about building failures, and that was interesting. So all of the little side parts were fun, and I'm still known today that I did the book, and on Amazon.com you could still find the book even though it's 20 years later. So that was my 15 minutes of fame. And then about a year ago I decided, since everybody is in such a rush and nobody could do the work in time, that I would type up a book while we were on vacation, Bobby and I, of excuses. I always wanted to have an excuse book, because when people call me and they say, you know, are my plans going to be ready tomorrow? And I would go through all these excuses why I can't do it. My draftsman was sick, or I was sick, or I was out of town. So I prepared this booklet that I now have of excuses from 1 to 65. And I gave it to all my clients, and now I just say number 2, 42, and 63. And it saves me all this time of going through all these excuses. And some of them are funny, but some of them are actually, they're true. You know, you just don't have enough time to do a proper job. But that's the latest thing that I've published. But I just did that on my own, just to give to all my clients. But I've in order to be active with our engineering group, I've also written articles and sent it to newspapers locally in Los Angeles about the problems with the building department, and I've written to city councilmen, and they send it on to the head of the building department in Los Angeles, and they've called me down for meetings with the head guys, and it's to try to get some of my ideas across, which, you know, have been good, and it's helped somewhat, but it's an exciting field. And I've enjoyed it, you know, very much. I don't know if I'm ready to write another book or not, but who knows? Maybe I'll think of for book number 2, book number 3. But right now, I have no plans for that. In closing, I'd like to offer a few words to my beautiful wife, Bobby, and my wonderful children. I'll tell you, this is maybe a little difficult to do, but overall, I feel very fortunate in having a wonderful wife through all these years. We've been married now 53 years, and she's been by my side all the time. And also to my children, my older son, who is an optometrist, Bruce, my younger son, Steve, who is everything else, accountant, CPA, and all this, as I say. But and Bruce's wife Rona, and my grandchild Michael, and Steve and his new fiance of just about 48 hours. That I'm very proud of all of you, and you've really given me a lot to be proud of, because I feel very fortunate when I talk to other people that have had so many problems with their children and their family, and I could always stand up and just feel so lucky. It always reminds me of that old joke where these 3 women get together, and one woman says, "Oi," and the next woman says, "Oi vey," and the third woman says, "We've got to stop talking about our children like this." Because I have no ois or oi veys to say. To me, I just feel very lucky, and that's about it.